Hey everybody, it's Brian. Welcome back to the shop. So today we're going to start on a very special project for me. A little over a year ago I lost my mom to cancer, and at her grave I was thinking about putting a little bench. A place to kind of sit, reflect on the good times, the good memories, and just to kind of sit down and have a moment of peace. So that's what we're going to do today. And let me show you a couple of SketchUp drawings that I made of the idea that I had in mind. And when we come back, I'll introduce you to the wood that we're going to use. So as you guys can see by the SketchUp design, it's very Asian influenced. The bench has a lot of uplifting curves, uplifting angles, but still has very sleek, elegant lines, which is perfect for this application. So let me show you the wood that I've got here. This is a nicely figured piece of ambrosia maple, and it's going to make an excellent bench. Now, one thing that we need to talk about is the scale of this project. This is not a full-scale bench. It actually borderlines on being a miniature, and that's because of where it's going. Again, being in a cemetery, I don't want a full-size bench, which would essentially take up the whole slab for the top, to be overpowering and overbearing. I don't want it to look out of place. The design that you've seen is actually only 2 foot long, about 9 inches deep, and about 8 inches tall. Now, that's still plenty big enough for the average person to sit on, but it's really more for decoration than anything. And speaking of decoration, we are going to do some embellishments to this slab eventually. We're going to do some inlay work on it. We're going to do some nice mortise and tenons on this. And we're just going to make it perfect. You know, what can I say? A project like this really deserves, you know, all the stops, all the skills that you can throw into it. This is the project to do it on. So I'm pretty excited to get started with it. So let's take it over to the bench and start cleaning this slab up. Now, looking at the slab a little bit closer, you can see that it's actually far from perfect. We got some bandsaw marks here from when it was initially milled. Also, we've got some snipe back here from the planer when it was first dressed. And the biggest problem, as you can probably see, is that it's got a pretty good twist to it. Now, ironically enough, this slab was actually meant to be a bench many years ago, but due to the twist, it just wasn't suitable for that application. However, our bench is going to be much smaller. So by cutting off our 2 foot section, which will be in this general area, that's going to solve a lot of the twist problem. It seems to be mostly back in this section anyway. Also, our top is going to be 1.25 inches thick. Right now, we've got 1.5 inches to play with. So I think that's going to give us just enough material to true the face back up and get it flat and still come in at the thickness that we want. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take the skill saw and we're going to have to rip it down here in this area. Again, this will be our top, this will be our legs. Once it's ripped, what we'll do is we'll draw some straight lines on here and run it through the bandsaw and actually start getting it into more of a square shape that we can work with. right, so now we're at the point when we need to start flattening these slabs out. And the way I want to do it is I'm going to use the planer. What I've done is attached each of the slab, again this is leg, this is going to be the top, to a straight piece of plywood that I had. I've hot glued it down, and then what I did was I leveled it as best I could, minimizing taking all of it off from one side or the other. I got it as level as I possibly could, and I cut some wedges, as you can see, and I've hot glued those in as well. So now this thing is rock solid, it's ready to be run through the planer. Of course, you could do this with a hand plane. It takes a lot more time and a lot more skill, really. You could also set up some router rails and do it that way, but this seems to be the quickest, and I get really good results with it. So that's the method that I'm going to choose. So I'm ready over at the planer rather, and we're going to run these through and get them flat. So here they are out of the planer, and we have a perfectly smooth, flat surface on each of these now. The plywood carrier boards that we used worked out great. The wedges and the hot glue also worked perfectly. Now, we do have a little bit of tear out in spots on these, and that's due to this this burl figure that's also in this wood, which is beautiful, but it's also hard to work with. The grain is not running you know, straight anymore. It's not running with the length of the board. It's just kind of crazy right in these little areas, so therefore you get some tear out, and the only way you can get rid of that is basically by sanding it. The good thing about this is actually the bottom of the piece, and the reason I say that is because if you look back at the SketchUp drawing, the top has a 15-degree flare coming out, okay? And due to the little bit of a bark edge that's still here, this little cadmium layer, we're going to make this the bottom, and so that when we cut that out, that'll give us our flare, plus get rid of this. So this is going to be the bottom. We're still going to sand it out, but hopefully the other side will plane a little bit better. We won't have as much tear out. So that's the step we're at now. We're going to cut these free, run them through the planer again, and get two perfectly flat sides, and also take it down to the 1 1/4 inch thickness that we're looking for. Okay, so here we go. We got two boards nice and flat and true out of the planer, and as you can see, we were able to get that twist out of them. They don't rock anymore. One thing I do want to mention, the leg was originally supposed to be the same thickness as the top. When I took it out of the planer and got to looking at it though and kind of mocked it up, it just didn't look right. I feel that the legs should be just a little bit thinner than the top. So I took it down an extra 1/8 of an inch. So the legs are now 1 1/8 inch, the top is 1 1/4 inch. Not a big deal, but when you stand back and look at it visually, it really made a big difference to me. So the only thing we need to do is when we measure for our stretcher, you know, don't exactly go by the SketchUp drawing now, because we're going to need to add a 1/4 inch to it to accommodate for that. But other than that, that seems to be the only difference. So what we're ready to do now is basically cut our leg blanks in half, get them trued up, and start working on some tenons for the end of this thing. So now we're at the point where we're ready to make some tenons on our leg stock, and it's a good idea at this point to think ahead and size our tenon to the size router bit that we have. Now you can't always do this, but with a small scale project like this, it's perfectly acceptable. As you can see, what I've done is made a test here with a 3/4 inch router bit, and you can see that I've
I've got it laid out here on our leg stock as well. And we've got about a 3/16 shoulder going all the way around, which is a good size shoulder that'll keep everything nice and square. But as you can see, it's still a very substantial tenon, so we'll get all our strength from that. Now what I want to do is figure out the exact size of that router bit, because if we go ahead and make our tenon 3/4 and our router bit winds up being you know, a little bigger or a little smaller, well, that's really going to throw things off. A few thousandths of an inch can really affect the joint strength of a mortise and tenon. So using my caliper here, you can see that we're actually a little under, which is you know, it's no big deal because we're going to size the tenon accordingly, but it's a good idea to go ahead and check ahead of time and see what you're actually dealing with. So now that we know what size we're shooting for, we're going to take our leg stock back over to the table saw where I've got the dado blade set up, and we're going to start forming our tenon. So with the dado blade installed and using our sled and a stop block, we are going to start making our tenons. So we're going to run it through, flip it over, make our second cut. That's going to establish our shoulders, which is the most important part. The tenon, however, is a 1-inch tenon, and our blade is only at 13/16. It's the biggest that this particular blade will go. So we're going to be left with basically a little sliver all the way around. After we make our initial cuts, which again are the most important ones, I can simply remove the stop block. I'll be able to slide the piece further over and clean up the rest of it. So let's get to cutting.